It was just another busy morning at the airport. The usual buzz of travelers filled the air as families rushed to catch their flights. Business people moved purposefully with their rolling suitcases, and excited tourists chattered as they planned their adventures. The sun filtered through the large windows, casting a warm glow over the terminal, and everything appeared to be running smoothly. Officer Maria Santos, clad in her standard uniform, stood near the security checkpoint, keeping an eye on the crowds. With her was her trusted partner, Max, a highly trained German shepherd who had been with her for nearly 4 years. Max wasn't just a dog. He was an invaluable asset to the airport security team. With his sharp senses, he could detect narcotics, explosives, and other dangerous materials long before they ever made it past the security line. But this morning, something felt different. There was an odd tension in the air, almost like the calm before a storm. Max, who usually trotted along by her side without hesitation, was more alert than usual. His ears were up, his body rigid, and he occasionally paused to sniff the air. Maria, accustomed to his behavior, noticed his subtle changes in demeanor. She knew Max's instincts were rarely wrong. He could detect even the slightest trace of danger, and when he started acting this way, it was never a false alarm. The pair made their way through the busy terminal, weaving through the crowds. Max was unusually quiet, his paws tapping lightly against the polished floor as he moved. Normally, the dog would stay close, but today, he was pulling slightly ahead, his focus laser-sharp. Maria's hand instinctively rested on the leash, ensuring Max remained under control. They passed by a row of kiosks where travelers were checking in, and then through the baggage claim area where rows of suitcases and bags sat in neat stacks, waiting to be claimed by their owners. Max paused, his head slightly tilted to one side as he stood still, his nose twitching in the air. Maria stopped beside him, narrowing her eyes as she scanned the area for anything out of the ordinary. At first glance, everything appeared perfectly normal. But Max was staring intently at a particular luggage trolley, a single suitcase sitting unattended near a group of travelers. It wasn't the most eye-catching bag, but there was something about it that caught Max's attention. His tail was stiff, his posture rigid. He wasn't wagging it in the usual playful manner. Instead, it was pointed straight down in a sign of seriousness. Maria felt a wave of unease. She had been in this business long enough to know that Max's instincts were almost always right. Something wasn't right with that suitcase. She couldn't put her finger on it, but the strange behavior of her partner made her cautious. Without hesitation, she gave a subtle signal to her colleagues nearby. "Stay alert," she whispered to them, her eyes still fixed on Max, who was now sniffing the air furiously. Whatever was hidden in that suitcase, it wasn't going to be a simple mistake. Something was about to unfold, something none of them could predict. In the midst of the normal hustle and bustle of the airport, the warning signs were clear. Something, or someone, had slipped under the radar. And Max had found the first clue. Maria stood frozen for a moment, watching Max's body language shift. The usual calm and collected demeanor he carried had given way to a tense, alert stance. His tail, stiff and unmoving, was a clear sign that he was focused on something that didn't belong. The hairs on the back of Maria's neck stood up, her instincts kicking in as she observed her partner's every movement. Max had stopped in front of an ordinary-looking suitcase, but there was something off about it. And Max knew it. She took a slow step forward, her eyes narrowing as she looked more closely at the bag. It was black with a subtle pattern. Nothing distinctive, nothing that would raise suspicion at first glance, but the way Max was behaving told her otherwise. He had circled the bag a few times now, his nose twitching with rapid precision. His paws shifted slightly as he stood there, as if he was reluctant to leave it alone. Maria glanced around the terminal, observing the scene with a mix of caution and curiosity. Passengers continued to shuffle by, oblivious to the tense moment unfolding just a few feet away. There was no sign of anyone watching the suitcase or of any unusual activity nearby. But she knew something had drawn Max's attention, And when it came to her K9 partner, she didn't take any chances. "Max, what is it?" Maria murmured quietly, her voice barely audible over the sound of the bustling airport. Max gave no response, of course. He never did. Instead, his behavior was the only message she needed. He was on to something. She took another step closer to the suitcase, her hand instinctively gripping the handle of Max's leash a little tighter. She knew the drill by now. When Max flagged something suspicious, it was never a false alarm. His training made him one of the best, and he had saved countless lives with his sharp instincts. But this time, something felt different. There was an edge to his actions, something more urgent. "Let's move this one to the back," she said, signaling to a nearby colleague who was already observing the situation. Maria knew it was time to take immediate action. This wasn't just a simple case of a forgotten bag. There was a reason Max had singled it out, and it was a reason she couldn't ignore. Her colleague nodded and started to approach the trolley. As he moved toward the suitcase, Max's eyes never left it. The dog's focus was unyielding, and his body remained taut, every muscle seemingly poised for action. Maria's heart quickened as she observed him. The connection between them, forged over years of training and shared experience, told her that something serious was at play. The colleague, now standing by the suitcase, looked back at Maria for a moment before nodding. Together, they moved the suitcase out of the main area, ensuring no one else got too close. Every step felt heavy, as if time itself had slowed down. In the back of her mind, Maria could already sense the weight of what was about to unfold. Whatever was hidden inside that suitcase was not meant for the eyes of innocent travelers. And the fact that Max had pinpointed it so precisely left no doubt in her mind. This was far from a simple mistake. With the suitcase now in a secure area, far from the prying eyes of the public, Maria and her colleagues moved swiftly into action. The atmosphere had shifted from casual airport security to something far more serious. A small crowd of officers and specialists had gathered, each person wearing an air of quiet urgency. The team had already cleared the immediate vicinity, ensuring no one else was near the suitcase. Maria felt a surge of adrenaline, a familiar sensation that came with the weight of something important hanging in the balance. The bag was placed carefully on a table in the inspection room. The moment it settled on the surface, Max stood by, his attention unwavering. The K9 didn't budge, as if he was guarding the suitcase, his senses still keenly tuned to whatever was hidden inside. Maria stepped forward, giving Max a gentle pat on the head, before nodding to the officer in charge of the inspection. "Let's take a look," she said, her voice calm but steady. She could feel the tension in the room as the team began their standard procedure of carefully checking the luggage. One officer unzipped the suitcase, his hands moving cautiously. No one spoke as the sound of the zipper pulling apart echoed through the room. What they found inside wasn't what they had expected. At first glance, the contents seemed ordinary: clothes, toiletries, and personal items that looked like they belonged to any other traveler. But as they started to remove the items layer by layer, something caught their attention. Beneath a folded shirt, a small metallic object was tucked away, its sleek surface glinting under the fluorescent lights. The officers exchanged wary glances, and Maria felt a growing unease. This wasn't the usual contraband or a simple security risk. As the suitcase was carefully unpacked, more unusual items came into view. A series of tightly wrapped packages, each one wrapped in foil and plastic, were nestled beneath the clothes. The packaging seemed deliberate, too deliberate. Maria's mind raced. It was clear this wasn't a random mistake. Whoever had packed this suitcase had done so with precision, hiding whatever was inside in plain sight, under the guise of a normal travel bag. The lead officer lifted one of the foil-wrapped packages and began to unwrap it carefully. The object inside was unlike anything anyone in the room had seen before. It wasn't just a random assortment of items. It looked like part of a machine, but there was no clear indication of what it could be used for. It was an intricately designed object, with wires and metal parts, and what appeared to be a small power source embedded within it. The officer paused, his brow furrowing as he examined the item more closely. Is this The atmosphere in the room grew heavier as the last of the items in the suitcase were carefully removed. With each new object that emerged, the sense of urgency intensified. The initial excitement had shifted to something more serious, a realization that they were dealing with something far beyond what anyone had anticipated. Maria stood close by, watching as her colleagues examined each new find. The foil-wrapped packages were now fully unwrapped, revealing a collection of small, highly engineered components. There were metal fragments, circuit boards, and what appeared to be a collection of wires meticulously soldered together. It looked like a project, but one of a kind, precise, delicate, and dangerous. Maria's heart pounded in her chest as she began to grasp the scale of the discovery. This isn't just a malfunctioning device, one of the specialists muttered as he held up a piece of machinery. It was shaped like a small, compact box, and as he turned it over in his hands, Maria noticed the faint, blinking lights embedded inside. It seemed like a piece of something much larger, but what could it be for? The specialist's voice was tight with tension, but he said nothing further. It was clear he didn't want to make assumptions, but the implications of what they were holding in their hands were undeniable. The lead officer stepped back, his face pale. "We need to call in the bomb squad," he said firmly, his voice betraying his calm demeanor with an undercurrent of apprehension. Maria nodded in agreement. She had seen her fair share of dangerous materials, but this was something else. These weren't just simple tools or contraband. These items had a purpose, and it was one she couldn't yet fathom. Max, still standing at attention by the suitcase, seemed to sense the mounting tension. His normally calm eyes were now sharp, alert, watching the unfolding scene. Maria knelt beside him, her hand resting on his head for a brief moment. It was as though Max was aware of the danger in the room, sensing the same rising fear that gripped everyone else. Maria stood up and addressed the team, trying to steady her racing thoughts. "We need to secure this area and get this information to the right authorities immediately. I don't care how long it takes. We need answers. Now." Her voice was steady, but inside, a storm of questions swirled. The most pressing one was, who would go to such lengths to hide a device like this in plain sight? The lead officer gave a quick nod, and the team swiftly began to organize their next steps. As they carefully placed each item into separate containers for further analysis, Maria couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something important. The suitcase had been meticulously packed, everything in its place, and yet no one had thought to question it, until Max had drawn attention to it. The bomb squad was on their way, but time felt like it was slipping away. Every second counted. The sense of unease grew, and Maria's thoughts turned darker. What if they were too late? What if this was only the beginning of something far more dangerous? As the door to the secure room closed behind them, locking them inside with the evidence, Maria's mind raced. She couldn't escape the nagging feeling that they were on the brink of something far bigger than a simple security breach. The moment the bomb squad arrived, the air in the secure room shifted. The once controlled environment now buzzed with tension, as if every person present could feel the gravity of what was unfolding. Maria and her team stepped aside to make room, watching as the squad's experts donned their protective suits and prepared to carefully inspect the suspicious items that had been unearthed from the suitcase. Their movements were deliberate, almost mechanical, as they cautiously moved towards the pile of components, their eyes scanning the room, alert to any signs of danger. Maria's mind was racing. Every moment felt like a countdown, the sense of impending disaster growing with every passing second. She'd seen security threats before, drugs, explosives, even counterfeit goods, but this was something entirely different. The objects in the suitcase weren't just contraband. They were intricately designed pieces of machinery that could easily be turned into something dangerous. But what was the ultimate goal of this operation? And why had it been smuggled into the airport, hidden under layers of normal luggage? The bomb squad leader, a tall man with a sharp gaze, carefully inspected each component, his brow furrowed in concentration. "This isn't just a malfunctioning device," he muttered again, more urgently this time. "These pieces are deliberate, each one purpose-built, and they're too clean, too well-packed to be an accident." His voice held a note of finality, as if he had reached a conclusion, but wasn't yet ready to share it with the rest of the team. Maria's stomach twisted. She had a sinking feeling that they weren't dealing with a simple smuggling operation. As the squad continued to work, Maria received a call from her superior. His voice was tight with controlled urgency. "Maria, I need you to clear the area around the terminal. We've just received intel that this could be part of a larger coordinated operation. We don't know how many more of these devices might be circulating in the airport, or if this is just the first part of something bigger. We're shutting down access to the terminal. I need you to act fast." Maria's heart dropped. The airport had always been a place of security, a public space that millions of people trusted every day. Now it was becoming a focal point of something terrifying. Her mind raced as she relayed the message to her team. The terminal would have to be locked down, and all flights would need to be redirected or canceled. But the larger question hung in the air. What exactly were they dealing with? She turned to Max, who had remained silent by her side throughout the chaos, still alert and watchful. The K-9's presence had been their first clue, and now the very sense of danger he had detected was becoming clearer by the minute. There was no more time for hesitation. "Everyone, we need to move," Maria called, her voice steady but filled with urgency. "We're evacuating the area. Keep everything locked down tight until further notice. This could be far worse than we think." As her team began to organize the evacuation, the tension escalated. Passengers were ushered out of the terminal in a hurried, orderly fashion, their confusion evident on their faces. Airport staff helped with crowd control, but the chaos was palpable. Rumors of a possible threat spread quickly, amplifying the sense of fear. Maria could only hope they were making the right call. But deep down, she knew that the real danger had only just begun. As the evacuation unfolded outside the secure room, Maria and her team remained focused on the task at hand. The bomb squad continued their careful examination of the devices, their specialized equipment scanning each part with painstaking detail. Every second felt like an eternity, and Maria couldn't help but feel a growing unease as the pieces of the puzzle started to come together. She'd seen chaos before, but nothing like this. It wasn't just the potential threat in front of her. It was the chilling realization that this was a well-coordinated operation. Someone had planned this meticulously. The suitcase, the contents, and the means of smuggling it all into the airport were too calculated to be random. The longer Maria thought about it, the more she felt a knot tighten in her chest. Whoever was behind this was intelligent, careful, and dangerous. But who were they? With the terminal evacuated, Maria's thoughts turned to the most pressing question: who had left the suitcase behind? The identity of the owner was still a mystery, and it didn't sit well with her that they had no leads. The ticket for the suitcase had been booked under a false name, and there were no surveillance images of anyone who looked suspicious near the baggage claim area. The lack of information was unsettling. Maria called her superior again, her frustration rising as she filled him in on the latest developments. "We've got nothing on the owner. The ticket was bought under a fake name, and there are no clear images from the security footage. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing." Her superior's voice was tense. "Keep digging. We need to find out who is behind this. And fast. This could be part of something much larger than we realized. I'll notify the FBI and Homeland Security. We need to trace any connections, especially with the sophistication of these devices." Maria could hear the faint buzz of activity in the background of his call. Authorities from all over were mobilizing now. As she ended the call, her mind returned to the suitcase. They had analyzed the items, but they still didn't know what the devices were meant to do or how they were activated. Was it a bomb? A form of sabotage? The uncertainty gnawed at her, but the one thing that was certain was that the owner was a ghost. They had vanished without a trace. Her team continued to search for any possible leads. Forensics teams worked to scan for fingerprints on the suitcase, though Maria knew it was unlikely they'd find anything. Whoever packed it had been thorough. It didn't help that the suitcase had been left unattended for an unknown amount of time, making it harder to trace its origin. The authorities scoured the airport's security footage once more, hoping to catch even the slightest glimpse of a suspicious figure, but the search proved fruitless. As the hours dragged on, Maria's frustration deepened. The investigation had taken on a more sinister tone. This wasn't just a simple smuggling operation. The planning, the care, and the secrecy behind it pointed to something much more coordinated, something far more dangerous. Maria couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the first piece of a much larger puzzle. Whoever was behind it had already made their move, and they were getting closer. The airport, now a shell of its usual calm, felt eerily quiet. Passengers were still stranded outside, some confused, others anxious about their canceled flights. But all Maria could think about was the unanswered question: who was responsible for this, and what were they planning next? The clock was ticking, and the answer was still out of reach. The hours seemed to stretch endlessly as Maria and her team scrambled to follow up on every lead. The bomb squad had finished their initial examination of the suitcase, but the mystery was far from solved. The devices inside were sophisticated, more advanced than anything Maria had seen in her career. They weren't just explosives. They were components that, when assembled, could create something far more catastrophic. But what that final product was, they still had no idea. Back in the command center, the air was thick with tension. Agents from the FBI and Homeland Security had arrived, bringing with them an influx of resources and expertise. But no one seemed to have any solid leads. The suitcase's owner was still a ghost, and the trail had gone cold. Maria stood near the large map of the airport, her eyes scanning the layout. The surveillance footage had been reviewed again and again, but there was no trace of the person who had dropped off the suitcase. The lack of identifiable clues was maddening. Even the fingerprint analysis on the suitcase and its contents had come up empty. The owner had been meticulous. Everything had been planned with the precision of a professional. "Any luck on tracing the ticket?" Maria asked, her voice tinged with frustration as she approached one of the agents who was reviewing paperwork. "Nothing," the agent replied grimly. The name on the ticket was fake. It was purchased with cash, no identification tied to it. Whoever did this knew exactly how to cover their tracks. Maria's mind raced. This wasn't just a random act of terror. It was the work of someone organized, someone who had planned every detail. Whoever was behind it wasn't acting alone. There had to be a larger network, a group that was orchestrating this operation from the shadows. But who were they? What was their end goal? Suddenly, Maria's phone buzzed. She glanced down at the screen and saw that it was a call from her superior. Her stomach dropped as she answered. "Maria, we got something." Her superior's voice crackled through the line. "We've traced a vehicle tied to the suitcase. It was registered to an address near the outskirts of the city. It's not much, but it's a start. We need you to head there immediately. Bring backup." Maria didn't waste a second. She turned to the team, her face hardening with determination. "We've got a lead. Everyone, get ready. We're heading out." Within minutes, Maria and a small team of officers were in their vehicles, speeding toward the address. The city was quiet, but the weight of the situation felt like a dark cloud hanging overhead. As they neared the location, Maria's thoughts raced. This was the break they'd been waiting for, but it didn't come without its dangers. The people behind the suitcase were dangerous, and they weren't going to give up their secrets easily. The address led them to an industrial area, the kind of place where businesses were sparse and the shadows grew long. Maria's heart pounded as she gave the signal to her team to spread out and approach cautiously. The building was old, with peeling paint and broken windows, an ideal place for someone trying to stay under the radar. They moved toward the entrance, the weight of each step pressing down on Maria. She had no idea what they were about to walk into, but she knew it was going to be the moment that would change everything. They were getting closer, closer to the person responsible for the deadly plot that had already set the airport on edge. But what lay behind that door? Maria couldn't shake the feeling that they were stepping into a hornet's nest, and once they were in, there would be no turning back. Maria's pulse quickened as she and her team approached the dilapidated building. The air felt thick with the tension of the moment, and the low hum of distant traffic was the only sound that broke the eerie silence surrounding them. Every instinct Maria had told her to move cautiously. This was no longer just about a suitcase or a few dangerous devices. They were about to face the mastermind behind it all. They reached the entrance, a rusted metal door that creaked as they pushed it open. Inside was a dimly lit warehouse, filled with the scent of old wood and oil. The shadows stretched far across the walls, obscuring corners where anything could be hiding. Maria signaled for her team to fan out, their footsteps soft as they moved in sync, their weapons drawn and their eyes scanning every inch of the space. The deeper they ventured into the warehouse, the more it became clear that it was abandoned, at least on the surface. The floor was littered with scraps of machinery and empty crates, as if the place had been used for storage but left to rot. But there were subtle signs that told a different story. Haphazardly stacked boxes, old equipment that looked like it had been hastily moved, and an overwhelming sense of something being out of place. It was all too perfect, as if someone had been preparing for this moment. Maria's hand tightened around her weapon as they rounded a corner, the low light casting long shadows that played tricks on their eyes. Her breath was steady, but her mind was racing. The suitcase had been just the tip of the iceberg. Whoever was behind this was calculating, prepared, and not likely to give up without a fight. Suddenly, a sound broke the silence, a faint clink of metal, followed by a soft thud. It came from the far end of the warehouse. Without hesitation, Maria signaled to her team, and they moved toward the noise, their steps quickening. As they approached the back of the warehouse, they found a large metal door slightly ajar. Through the crack, Maria could make out the faint outline of a figure moving in the shadows. Her heart skipped a beat as she signaled for the team to hold their position. They needed to be strategic. They couldn't risk alerting the person inside. With a deep breath, Maria slowly pushed the door open, her team flanking her on either side. The figure inside froze at the sound of the door scraping against the floor. For a brief moment, time seemed to stop. Maria's eyes locked onto the person standing in the middle of the room. A tall, cloaked figure, their face hidden in shadow. Then, without warning, the figure lunged and chaos erupted. Gunfire rang out, echoing through the warehouse, and Maria's team returned fire, quickly taking cover behind nearby crates. The figure, agile and quick, darted between obstacles, moving with the precision of someone who had been expecting this confrontation. Maria's adrenaline surged as she moved forward, her thoughts focused on one thing: capturing this person. They had answers, and Maria was determined to get them, no matter the cost. She called out for backup as she cautiously moved closer to the figure, trying to anticipate their next move. The standoff lasted only moments, but in those moments, every second counted. Maria's training kicked in as she darted forward, her weapon steady. With a swift move, she tackled the cloaked figure, bringing them to the ground. The struggle was brief, and with the help of her team, they quickly restrained the individual. Breathing heavily, Maria looked down at the person she had captured. The hood fell back, revealing a face she never expected to see. A face from her past, someone she had once trusted. The shock hit her like a freight train. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. The person responsible for the chaos at the airport, for the deadly devices, was someone she knew intimately. The realization sent a wave of disbelief through her, but there was no time to process it. The mastermind was finally in their custody, but the questions only multiplied. Why? How had this happened? And more importantly, what was their plan?